Come on in, everybody. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Glad to see everybody. We'll give everybody a chance to kind of get in here before we get started. Appreciate y'all taking time out of y'all Sunday night. Bear with me just a second here as we get all the systems firing. We have a great show tonight. Great guest speaker, a guest, good friend. Let's see here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I want to thank everybody for taking time out tonight. We have a wonderful show, an awesome guest, friend and brother Dr. James Winfrey. He's been on before. He did an awesome job for us. I'm glad he took time out. He had time in the schedule. Tonight we're going to discuss domestic violence and mental health and how those two roles kind of intertwine and play a part. Also, for those that haven't had the privilege of watching the show before, I wanted to say how we got to this point, how a Convo with B-Mac came about. Some months back, I was going through some personal issues that had me in a place to where I was really struggling with my mental health in a sense. And I began to really just think about there have got to be other people that are dealing with issues that don't have any type of resource. And it came to me to create this platform to do the show. Hey, Selena, love you. Thanks for supporting. And so from that situation came a Convo with B-Mac, and that was back in September, October, and here we are in February, late February, and we're still here. And I'm appreciative to each and every person that supported us and are here. And I'm going to tell you because it looked like I lost my guest for a minute here, but so we're gonna continue on until he can get logged back on. This particular segment, Selena brought it to my attention. I had seen it, and I told her that I said I was going to work on getting this show together, where we've had a couple of different instances of domestic violence, and people have decided to take other people's lives as well as their own. And this pattern is very troubling to me, and it's that sense of hopelessness that I can't change, but I want to try to get information out to try to help others and empower others. So if we can do something about it, we can. And that's my goal by this show. And without any further ado, I'm going to bring in my brother, Dr. Winfrey. No.
Good brother. Good to see you again.
How you doing? Same here.
I'm blessed. Thank you so much for having me on for another round. I appreciate it beyond words, good brother.
All right, man. I thank you. And listen, I should have put on my bow tie tonight. I said James I said he's gonna be on tonight. I said I said, but no, I'm gonna let him have it because he rocks the bow tie much better than I do. So I'm gonna let him have it tonight. I'm gonna let him have it. So you look good and stylish as always, bro.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Just taking some fashion habits some 30 years later from my brothers down at Gamma G. So I appreciate it.
Hey, those were good times.
Absolutely.
Were good times. No, the topic at hand that we're going to discuss is domestic violence and mental health. We were talking about it a little bit offline before we went live, and just the scope of it and the broadness thereof it and talked about some of a couple of instances that have occurred in the last couple of months,
Mm-hmm.
where one party has decided that life is just too hard, and he takes his aggressions out on the other person, and then decides to take his own life as well.
Mm-hmm.
And like as I told you before, that is really troubling to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't perceive to have all the answers, but what I want to do tonight is for us to create that dialogue to try to figure out what we can do as people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, well, brother, the whole concept and idea of domestic violence is it's so much to unpack there. It's so many intricacies regarding the influences. A lot of it comes down to etymology, which is basically the origins of how one learns. Our
mhm.
society, particularly in this generation, there's so much information that's coming so fluidly. It's a good thing, but then it's a negative thing because nowadays anybody has a platform without a filter. If you
Okay.
remember when we were growing up, that's when a lot of the labels on records, a lot of the labels on movies, even the movie rating, all that was really cultivated during our childhood. And you see that we had less episodes of aggression and definitely domestic violence. But when you live in a society that just continues to push the envelope and you don't have those filters and you just have information that's just being literally just shoved down people's throats without the ability to really process, what's
Mhm.
appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's
Mhm.
emotionally and mentally sound,
Mhm.
depending on what ground these seeds lands on, it's going to have a lot to do whether you have a harvest of bounty or, unfortunately, as I like to say, are you going to have a harvest of bodies in this case?
Ah,
So there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to domestic violence.
got you. And I figured it when I got ready to unpack this because as we talked about offline, it goes both ways. There's no one gender that owns the 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 role of being the aggressor in domestic violence.
Absolutely, absolutely. The irony in that is that in today's society, as we've grown to be more, everything equal, or as we hear a lot of times, love is love, and everybody's the same, nobody's different.
Hmm.
That is a great, great misstep when it comes to just understanding aggression and understanding the triggers of stressors and things of that capacity. We're not all the same,
Hmm.
not all different. We don't come from the same circumstances and walks of life. And so if everybody's created equal, yeah, we're created equal, but we're not developed equally. And because of that, we learn things differently. We
Right.
respond to things differently. And I can say in my practice, domestic violence does come up. Oftentimes, those that are facing criminal charges, they do end up being referred to me for anger management. And I've had my share of female patients as well as male patients. I've actually witnessed that in actual sessions when I've seen more so females be the
Mm.
aggressors as far as literally, violating those boundaries. And so there is, at this point, there's not a real differentiation because anger and frustration and wrath does not have a gender specific ideology to it. It's a human dynamic. And when we start realizing that and addressing that from an equilateral perspective, I think we'll be able to be much more impactful when it comes to the
Mhm.
regulation of emotions, but then um, also preventing and minimizing episodes of domestic violence.
Okay. Okay. And you went straight to what I was going to say because let's look to define what domestic violence is, because
Mhm.
most people think that domestic violence is simply a the physical aspect of it, where one person can physically harm the other, but that's not the case.
Oh, no, 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 no. Domestic violence has so many different dynamics to not just the physical violence. It could be emotional violence. It could be financially imposed. Um, it can also be demonstrated with people that you don't live with. It can be with neighbors. So when we think
Hmm.
about domestic, we think about anything that deals with our home dynamic, or basically a home inner circle. So it's not just, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband and wife. It could be amongst family members. It could be cousins and cousins, uncle and aunts. So it's basically anybody that's a part of that domestic circle or circumference, rather, involved with the individual. If there's an established relationship there, it can fall up under the category of domestic violence.
Awesome. Okay. As I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking, one of the biggest things that I'm taking from this already is, in any relationship, you have to be careful in your tone and tenor of how you speak to your significant other, because whereas you may not perceive it as a true act of aggression, it can be perceived as such, because like you just said, domestic violence isn't always physical. It's how you speak. If you constantly speak harshly to that significant other, or if that your significant other doesn't have the financial wherewithal that you do, you are using that as a point of contention to control them. So okay. Interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. And for those that are logged on, if you have questions or points that you'd like to make, feel free, because again, this show is an open dialogue. Selena, I know that you always have awesome insight, so don't be bashful tonight. We love that input because we want to create that dialogue so we can help as many people as we can. And as we talked about earlier, the episodes, well, not the incidents, rather. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to call them incidents. I'm going to call them tragedies. Most recently, the one in Milwaukee, where the young man was in his early 20s and the young lady was in her early 20s. And I have a small clip that I'm going to play from it, and we'll discuss it a little bit. Where he took her life and ultimately took his life in front of his 2-year-old. So I'm going to play this clip really quickly.
Type of shit, bro. I'm not straight, bro. I'm not crazy. But it's a lot of shit I can't take, bro. Hold on.
And that was a very small clip from it. I wouldn't dare play it all. For those that would like to see it, it's on YouTube, and where he goes on and on and on talking about it. But the one thing that I call interesting, he said, I'm not straight, but I'm not crazy. And he's been going through a lot. And you expounded while we were off before we started the show, kind of what things that may play a role in that type stuff for young men. Could you elaborate on what we talked about?
Okay, for young men, again, so many different dynamics play a role. Societal expectations. We live in a world, and I say this often, and I'll live and die by this sentiment. I feel so strongly. From a psychological and sociological dynamic, we live in a world where, respectfully, if a woman shows emotion, then it's catered to, it's embraced, it's supported. Men show it's rejected. Their manhood is questioned, and a lot of times, what I teach when I used to work with the child and adolescent population, teaching them that one of the best things you can do is cry, because it's a release. It's a release. I think actually, good brother, of the quote that you gave, I think one of the first shows we did, when you said, never trust a warrior who can't cry. And knowing how important it is just to have that release, because oftentimes males tend to oscillate between two extremes, either between being extremely happy or extremely angry, and there's no middle ground. And so if we're not extremely happy, you're going to see us be extremely angry. Then at that point, it's built up, and then it's being fueled by adverse feelings, resentment, bitterness, which then leads to harsh treatment and a harsh directing of those emotions. And then at that point, At that point, when a person becomes emotional and is fueled, fueled by a lot of hurt, a lot of feeling dismissed, a lot of not being heard. If you look at a lot of domestic violence situations, and you see the male dynamic, if you listen outside of the unfortunate theatrics of what you may see, even in seeing that brother that was in the video, it's about being heard and listened to. One of the challenges is when a person doesn't feel heard, they're going to demand to be listened to, and they're going to go to any extreme to do it. So him saying, I'm not straight, but I'm not crazy, saying I got some things going on, but contrary to popular belief, I'm not losing my mind. I just lost my voice.
Right. God, that's very powerful. I have 2 comments here. Erica said, she said, I appreciate you saying DV comes in different forms because so many people think DV, the one thing DV is someone getting beaten and bruised and having physical bruises. So I'm glad that we were able to put that out there because it doesn't, there's no one set form of domestic violence. And so, and I hope people can take that to heart. And Selena says, so many in her circle, including the victim's father, said there were no warning signs. He was a gentleman. What are we missing? And she was speaking in reference to that young man. There apparently, and based on what she was saying, that he didn't exhibit any warning signs prior to that happening. And my guess would be that amongst her and the 2 that lost their lives, he only exhibited those warning signs to her, or he was one of those that chose to internalize everything for whatever reason. And and I used to be guilty of this, where something would happen and I'd be like, okay, it's all right. I never check up. One of those things where you and your significant other are dealing with something, having this disagreement, and as opposed to expressing myself, I'd be like, you know what, that's all right. Just immediately internalizing. And he could have been one of, I don't know the circumstance, but he could have been one of those. And I think and this would be my guess, he could have had so much stuff packed from years prior to that. And it wasn't just his situation with her. When it was a powder keg and he packed so much on, and when he got to a point where it just exploded. Now, I'm going to defer to you because that's more your field of expertise, and you can kind of elaborate on that more. But that's kind of what I feel like. If there were no signs, that's possibly what could have been the case.
Good brother, whenever I hear that, I immediately challenge that narrative, because there are always signs. And to say that there were no signs, oftentimes what it does is it absolves the individual circle of any responsibility, which is why I think that we say there were no warning signs, because there's a sense of responsibility that you would have to take in that, just like there's a sense of responsibility that these 2 lives, actually, you might as well count the child's life, because the child's now without a mother and a father. So there's 3 lives that have been impacted here. One thing that I do, in my practice, and I thank God that He sends me a lot of men, and I'm so grateful. And I always, whenever there's a man that comes to me for therapy, from the first session, I'm always wanting to celebrate the fact that I know the courage that it took just to come up there. And I really make certain that whatever adverse feelings he may have, I give that man what I would probably want if I was in that situation. So oftentimes I refer to him as, king, high priest, anything to start countering those adverse feelings, because oftentimes the feelings of just being overlooked, dismissed, not listened to, or even threatened in that capacity, that's what men tend to come to my practice with when it comes to a lot of mental health dynamics, but particularly the domestic one. One thing that I employ with my male population is I I try to teach them that it's okay to do what I call vocalizing your voice. Vocalizing your voice. And what that is particularly like what you said, brother. Oftentimes when men are asked, are we okay? The first instinctual answer is, yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. Our face will tell otherwise. Our body language says something otherwise. But there's a lot of layers to what that means for us. Then again, let's invert it. If we have a dynamic where if a woman says she's not okay, then there's a cultivation of wanting to develop that and see what's wrong and take as much time as possible. And I'm all for that because again, emotions are not gender specific. But when it comes to men, we typically have not been taught how to do it, or we've tried it and it's backfired. Things that we share oftentimes get thrown back in our face. So then we realize it's not safe. So we don't say anything. But what I teach the men that I work with, and I do this myself, if a person asks you, are you okay? Being honest and saying no, especially if it's your significant other. Because what I get men to try to understand is that in a relationship, we're supposed to be teaching one another our language of communication. If I don't give you something to learn, then you'll never learn me. Because if there's something upsetting about you, you're going to let me know. Typically, the women we love are going to let us know when they're not pleased. What ends up happening is we end up cultivating a very one-sided relationship because we're not teaching them how to make adjustments to the things we need. So we quietly end up becoming resentful. And resentfulness leads to being bitter. And then all of a sudden, what looks like this burst of aggression, or if we come out of character, say if a man goes out and cheats on his significant other, oh, I didn't see that coming. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. But oftentimes, in not saying anything, then it just bubbles on the inside, and an outlet is then looked for. And that's typically when alcohol comes into play, drugs come into play, or promiscuous behavior comes into play. There's going to be an outlet there. But what I'm trying to teach my male population is put the woman you love in a position that she can learn you by saying, no, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Did you sleep well last night? No, I didn't. And what I find is that a lot of men come back and tell me how shocked their significant others are. They actually say, when they actually say something that breaks the mold of typically I'm okay, not putting I need to listen. I need to be that safe place for him, because if not, then that's how we have budding issues that can surface. But the warning signals are always there. It's just a matter of how attentive we are, how sensitive we are to people and to one another. Like if you know something is uncomfortable for a person, you may have to ask more than once. But typically one of those hurtful things is when a person you love says, well, I asked you and you said no, but you can see the hurt, you can see the discomfort. And when you lack that empathy and that understanding, but you want it provided to you when it's you, then I'm sure there have been instances where a person may have had to ask you a couple of times, are you okay? Because that's signaling with you in that capacity. So if you see that a person, your discernment, if you see that they're just in a state of tenseness or something that's different from how they normally would operate, then I think it's our responsibility on the basis of the relationship to have that conversation, even if we got to do a little probing, because that's saying we care. And if nothing else, they may not say nothing in that instance, but it's going to leave such an impression that they may come back on the back end and say, hey, can we talk, or do you have some time? And then really being available to listen when people are wanting to express themselves. There's nothing more frustrating when people misconstrue what you're saying when you're hurting and you just want to be heard. And a lot of times what men tell me in my practice is, I just want to be heard. I can't get a word in. I keep getting interrupted. I keep getting my words twisted. So they end up not wanting to say anything. And then When there's an explosion, oh, I never saw that. He was this kind of, and inherently, he may very well have been a gentleman. He very nice-hearted, but you can provoke a kitten, and a kitten will eventually hiss and scratch at you by instinct. Not saying that is right, but we can't say we love people if we're not willing to go there with them and provide that safe place. We just can't.
Man, Newt, you just really knocked that one out the park, because I'm sitting there and as you're saying these things, I'm looking at myself. I'm looking in the mirror as what you're saying, and I'm like, man, and Selena says we have to allow men to be vulnerable, and I definitely agree with that, because if we cannot actually be allowed to let down our guard, we can communicate at a much higher level. And if, like you stress this, if we can feel like we're being heard, it's because if I attempt to communicate with you, but I'm thinking I'm saying all the right words, but yet I'm not getting the desired effect because I don't feel like I'm being heard. I'm gonna regress. I'm gonna take a step back, because I'm like, okay, well, I tried. But I think that goes both ways. I think because I know early on in life, I know I was guilty of it. Whomever I may have been dating at the time, they would try to communicate, and if I wasn't in a place emotionally to hear it or receive it, it probably seemed like I wasn't hearing what they were saying. And, so if they didn't feel like they were being heard, of course, now where them essentially trying to just communicate with me, it turns into, fussing and yelling, and, that's where their aggression comes from and their anger comes from, because I'm trying to communicate with you, and I'm trying to relay to you how I feel, but you're not being receptive to it. So, I'm just taking what you said, and I'm looking at it from both dynamics, how men will regress. And I think some women, they either regress or they'll become angry. And I think that goes on both sides of the aisle. Either they'll regress or they'll become angry. When you genuinely try to communicate with someone, and because you care enough about them, and then they are essentially, almost to a certain respect, rejecting you because you're like, I'm pouring out my heart.
Yes.
And they're sitting there looking at you like, okay. And so now you either going to get angry or you're going to take steps back, because you're like, because nobody likes that. Nobody likes that.
Good brother, I love the fact we're hitting on communicating. I want to share something with your audience I say in my practice. The issue isn't communication. It's more so, how do we differentiate between being a good communicator and a great communicator? And this is what I say to my population. A good communicator can express how they feel about any subject matter, period. They can express themselves. That's what a good communicator is, without being adverse in nature, without being confrontational. You can express yourself. Because people say communicate. Well, you can cuss each other out. You're technically, by definition, communicating. But we're talking about being a good communicator. So a good communicator can express themselves without adverse delivery. But what a great communicator does is, a great communicator knows their audience and how to take what they're expressing and tailor it to how the person on the receiving end can get it. And that's oftentimes where we miss it, where, and I hear this a lot. And, it's funny with me being a therapist, people joke, oh, I can do what you do. Because people say, I'm a good listener. No, it's so much more than what I do than just listening. It's so much more than that. Because I have to do three things. And this is my prayer every day as a therapist. I always pray God to give me the ability to see the unseen, hear the unhearable, so that I can speak the unspoken. And it's important that if you're talking about communication, I need to be able to be so in tune with what you're saying that I can also hear the stuff you're not saying, but then be humble enough to ask for clarity. And that's typically where we go wrong. And that's where a lot of men get frustrated. Is a lot of men have shared in my practice that they feel like their words get twisted. So what you're saying is, or no, that's not what I'm saying. When you start adding 2 or 3 words to it, you've changed everything that I've said at that point. And I can't explain something that I didn't extend to you. I'm gonna say that again. You can't explain something that you didn't extend. And by that time, now we're caught up in this tornado of dialogue, and now it just goes further and further out of control, which is how we end up having 2, 3, 4 hour conversations and we get nothing resolved because we were not great communicators. We don't listen with humility. We don't have a heart of acknowledgement or even being apologetic. It becomes more about debating. And the whole process with debating it's just a matter of point presentation. There's no resolution in debating. We're just presenting points. And when we don't know the differentiation in that, we'll say, I'm trying to communicate with a person, but then are you looking at your tone? Are you looking at your diction, your delivery, your timing? Are you listening versus hearing? So there's a lot of self-assessment that has to go in, because a lot of people, they swear that they're effective communicators, that they listen, but they oftentimes won't even give a person an opportunity to express themselves. So if you're not giving people an opportunity to express themselves, if you're not asking questions with the intent on learning versus getting the person into an emotional entrapment, then you're just simply not an effective communicator. And we need to call that for what it is.
Wow. I love the way you broke that down, because, there are so many people that think they communicate well, but, and you may be able to, but like you said, knowing your audience and allowing that person the opportunity to express themselves. And then if you first and foremost, allowing them to get their thoughts out, and not saying, well, oh, I know where they're going with this, because nobody wants to be cut off in the middle of a thought because you think you can finish that phrase. You already know where they're going. And then on top of that, you one very valuable point, getting that clarity. Even if you think you know what they were trying to say, get that clarity before you take the ball and run with it down this lane or that lane. So therefore, you two on the same page, because I could say one thing and initially think that we're on the same page, but you may have received it completely different, because perception is the law. Perception is the law. How you perceive it, it doesn't matter what I said, it's how you perceived it. So taking time to get that clarity is definitely priceless in having a healthy relationship, getting clarity and whatever. Did you mean to say it that way? And that person may be like, say it what way? Body language. My mind may have been in one place, and they saw my body language and thought I was hostile, and that wasn't the intention. As Selena says, so many times we listen to respond, which is not truly listening. And that is very key. And somebody used to say, I can't remember how the saying went, but it says it was like, listen to understand, and not listen to respond. I can't remember exactly how that quote went, but it's really important that we listen to try to understand what that person's trying to say, and not just to respond.
And truly wanting to approach it with understanding. And good brother, I want to give your audience 3 components of understanding that I practice, and I promote this with my population. The 3 components to understanding. The first component is being sympathetic or having sympathy. That's the first thing. Being sympathetic or having sympathy. And when you look at the Greek origin of the word sympathetic, it comes from 2 words, son, pathos. Son means with, pathos means feeling. So when you talk about being sympathetic, we're not talking about necessarily, quote, feeling sorry for a person. It means wanting to understand them with the purpose of feeling. You want to actually be able to connect with what it is that they're that they're expressing. So you want to approach it with feeling. Okay. The second is awareness, and we touched on that a little bit. But awareness is getting clarity, asking questions, paraphrasing, asking for something to be broken down. If you don't understand, and say, "Hey, I may not be getting what I think you're trying to say. Can you say it to me in a different way?" So awareness is a major, major, major component when it comes to seeking understanding. So we got the first one being, again, being sympathetic or listening with feeling, interacting with feeling. Second one being awareness, which is gaining clarity, definition. But this third one is, I think it's the most powerful one. It's actually my most favorite of the three, because I think it's where the most work and the heaviest lifting occurs. And the third one is having tolerance. Having tolerance. Now, here's the definition of tolerance that I share with my population. Having tolerance is when you have an attitude or a series of behaviors that a person is demonstrating that you care about. You don't particularly care for it, but you will respond in a way that does not have a negative overtone or adverse reaction to them. That's what tolerance is. Tolerance is not saying I'm okay, I'm accepting what you're doing. It's saying I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with your attitude. I'm not okay with your behavior. But because of who you are to me, in my tolerating it, what I'm saying is I'm going to react to you without punishing you. A lot of times when you're talking about understanding, that one is the biggest hill to climb, because that's where people get stuck. Is if I don't agree with you, then I end up being disagreeable. If I don't agree with you, then what ends up happening is it becomes more about punishing you and how I'm reacting to you. So that's why my tone changes. That's why certain things will come out of my mouth, because I'm punishing you because I don't agree with your attitude and behavior. So when we lack sympathy, when we don't seek awareness, and we don't demonstrate loving tolerance, then there's no way possible for us to ever gain an understanding of what someone else is saying.
Wow. That is a very awesome breakdown. And I definitely appreciate you sharing that with us, because when you break it down like that, it helps you understand and see it. It gives you that visual. In tolerance, I love that. It's saying, okay, well, I don't agree, but I'm not going to respond in a manner that's going to make this controversial or a conflict, but I'm still going to hear you, because you have a right. Your feelings are valid, whether I agree with them or not. Your feelings are still valid, because I think one of the biggest issues on top of everything is when someone says what their issue is, and the other person communicates, well, that ain't what I meant. Now you're just told them that their feelings aren't valid. When we try to invalidate someone else's feelings, and thus creates a major breakdown in communication, because once the moment you invalidate someone else's feelings, communication is that hill is that much higher to climb.
I'm so glad you said that, good brother, because one of the things that happens when we're back and forth with someone that we disagree about, and we do this unconsciously, which is often, it's a trigger. It's a trigger in our conversations, particularly our domestic situations. When somebody's trying to express themselves to you, and then the other person says to you, "That's not true." That's not true. Right there, that wall that goes up when you just told somebody basically what you're feeling is unreal, it's dismissed, I don't recognize it, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a non-factor. At that point, now it becomes more about survival, emotional survival at that point. So I always stress to my couples, nobody has the right to tell anybody that what they feel isn't true. We have to find better wording for how we lovingly can disagree with one another. Like, instead of saying that's not true, there's so many other ways you can say that. You can say that from the context of, I have a different recollection, or let me challenge you on that. That's one thing I teach my couples. Instead of saying it's not true, just say, let me challenge you on that, or let me play angel's advocate. or to say, I hear you, I receive what you're saying, I just disagree. Or I agree with you in theory, but I just disagree with you in execution. But just something that just says to a person, I recognize you, because that's the piece that's critical. And if you look at domestic violence situations, and the reason why they escalate is because people don't feel seen and heard. And if people have not learned how to master that moment of distress, then that's why you have the explosiveness, the impulsiveness, and the recklessness of attitude, mind, and behavior, because all they're saying is, I need you to see me. How can you love me and not see me in this moment? When you're being dismissive, when a person just needs that time and that attention, and you know that they need it, but now you're playing the manipulative mind game, and being passive aggressive. That's also a gaslighting dynamic that comes up a lot of times, where you'll say something that you know is going to hurt. You'll pick up your phone and start scrolling when a person is saying, will you please just pay attention? And so again, when that drastic dynamic comes to the surface, then you get an explosive situation where lives are forever changed. So it's just a matter of just self-assessment. And I really want to implore your audience to self-check. Like, be honest with yourself in terms of, are you really an effective listener? Do you cut people off when they're talking? Is it hard for people to be able to disagree with you? Do you have a vengeful approach when somebody disagrees with you? What's your recovery time? And what I mean by recovery time, and I tell this to my couples a lot, if you have a disagreement, you want to keep your recovery time as low as possible. And your recovery time is how quickly we can get back to being naturally who we know one another to be in that moment. Why does it take eight hours or 2 or 3 days for us to get back to being in a good space? Because we're not putting forth effort, because we're punishing one another. You didn't do what I wanted you to do, so I'm gonna come to bed, but I'm not gonna say goodnight, or I'm gonna turn over extra hard, or if you're married, I'm gonna do benevolence from you. So little things that people tend to do that just agitate the situation, and saying, okay, I want a low recovery time with my spouse. If something's wrong, we can table that, but it shouldn't impact our overall interaction with each other, because what that says is, even if you disagree with me, even if we're in a state of being at odds, I still love us at our core. And that's something else too, good brother, I want to stress to your audience as well. When you disagree with the person that you love, when you talk to them from who you know them at their core to be, meaning, even though we're disagreeing, and even though you may be saying something that I don't particularly like, I remember who the person is that I fell in love with. I remember who the person was that I got on one knee for, who the person was that said yes to me. I know that person. So even when we disagree, if I look at and remind myself that you're not enemy, this is just something that we don't agree on, then it's going to bring all my compassion to the very forefront, and I'm going to speak to you in a loving and compassionate way. You're not my enemy, because the enemy is the inner me. I tell my couples that. The enemy is the inner me. That's where you need to start. That's where your criticism needs to go. That's where we need to get to the origins of, why is it hard for me to disagree with people? Or why does my voice elevate? And really be honest about where that comes from. And that's when people like me come in. Go see a therapist, male or female. Be honest with yourself. I had a young brother reach out to me last week, and it just really blessed my soul. He's 32 years old, had an incident with his family, and how he responded was so extreme. He said, I got to get help. And then so he reached out, and then we had our first session, and was just able to get to the origins of that in terms of, loving brother would do anything for anybody, but what makes him angry is when it's not reciprocated. That was the part that made him angry. He just goes to such an extreme that he literally kind of blacks out. So what we're working on in therapy with him is, maybe you need to realign your circle so you won't be around people that won't reciprocate. And that's something that we got to look at too. There's a difference between our circle and our circumference. And we get the two confused. Just because we have history does not mean I keep you in my circle. If you are not conducive to my growth, my development, and literally me being a better human being, and you're in my circle, I have the right, because I want to be whole and happy, to move you to my circumference. I got to move you out, because you being close to me and being so rigid. A person who's emotionally rigid, it's hard to communicate with a person that has already made up their mind through their words and their actions that they're not going to listen. We have to be more accepting of that, because that's where the conflict comes in. You start forcing something down somebody's throat that don't even have an open mind, let alone an open mouth. So if you don't have an open mind, I can't feed you. So if that's the case, I don't want to waste the food that I have. I just rather save it for someone that's going to be able to not just be fed, but feed me in return. So a lot of that, good brother, it points back to us. It points back to us. If we have people that just don't want to listen, and you have an extensive history with them, the evidence speaks for itself. We will stay in marriages, we will stay in relationships simply because of the title and not the task. Throw the titles out. Throw the titles out. Task. What work are you doing? How are you an asset or a liability to my life? If you're a liability, you can't stay, because you're occupying somebody's space that would love to be there and add to me in the way that I want to add to them. And if you've given enough evidence, then you just have to make the decision to realign and readjust your life to move people out, so that they're not triggers for you, so that you don't respond in a way that now this is your reputation for just one moment of indiscretion. And that's what I tell people a lot of times when I work with domestic people. I don't really believe it's a reflection of who they are as a person necessarily. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just that one moment that they just lost it. They lost it. And that's what we have to look at, is we don't want to be in a situation where you can have that dynamic occur. And now this is what you're known for to your life. You got to be willing to look at, what are your non-negotiables? What kind of people are you allowing in your life? Good brother, I got a gentleman I've been working with for about a year. I mean, good brother. I mean, he's got a good heart. He divorced. Well, his wife divorced him. They were trying to get back together, so he thought. Went by the house and saw she had another guy that she'd been messing with the whole time, and he lost. And he ended up having to go to jail, got a felony because of that one moment. And that one moment he lost it. Now he put his hands on her, but he ran up in the house, and he was so upset because he felt played. He felt like, here you are, we taking trips. I'm thinking we're gonna get back together. I've loved you since 7th grade. We've been together all these years, and the whole time you got somebody else you playing with. And you playing with. So he lost it in that moment, only to end up going to jail, having a felony. Thank God he didn't lose his job, but just, for the rest of his life because of that moment. And ironically, now that we've worked on him moving on in his life, here comes the ex-wife. Like, just keep poking. And I challenge him, well, you're entertaining her. There's certain people you're going to have, people that, her phone number is saved wife. And I told him, take ex-wife out and put his daughter's names, put your daughter's name, and put daughter's mother. Because you got to stop the mental attachment that you have. Because if you keep seeing ex-wife, or even by their first name, I tell people that too. Don't go by the person's name, because that's an attachment that you have. Go by the title that they have. If this is, son's mother, if you answer that call, you already prompted yourself that the only conversation you need to have is about your child. It's not who you knew them to be, because that's non-existent. So it's so much, good brother, self-work that has to be done so that we don't even end up in these situations at all.
Whoa! Oh my God! That was really powerful. You really, you brought the 5-course meal today, bro. You really listen. You there was a lot of information. Let's see. Selena says, "Is it realistically feasible to heal from past within the confines of a relationship, or should you focus on healing then get into a relationship after we've done the internal work on ourselves?"
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that commentary, and I think that's a great point to consider. And what I would say is, I think that I think it's a blending of the two that can occur. I think what's important is having made the decision that we were going to heal first and foremost. A lot of times people just end up in a relationship, but they haven't focused on, okay, anything that's going to contribute to my healing, I want to be a part of that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean enter into a commitment, but I just want to be in environments where I do have the capacity to heal. But here's the thing that's critical. When you come out of a relationship, it is so important to process what did you learn from it, not what the other person did. But that's how I always know a person is ready to move on to a healthy relationship, is when they've done the self-work. When you can look at a relationship and say what you did wrong. And I think a great way to signal to a person that you're dating that you are a safe person to invest in is when you can go and say, you know what? I thought about my past relationships, and here's what I want to share with you in terms of what I learned. I learned the importance of boundaries. I learned the importance of communication, and here's what you can expect from me. Because at that point, your healing now has an accountability partner in a safe place. So they will know that you've done the self-work and that you're somebody that you can actually that they can actually build with. Because anytime you hear in a relationship all the bad stuff that the other person did, that's always a red flag. Because that means that the person didn't look to see how they contributed in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I believe any relationship that dissolves, I believe, is two people's fault in some capacity or another. It's not just one person. It's either, even if you didn't necessarily allow a situation, you may have triggered it, but what thought have you given to it that you can say, hey, here's how I might have contributed. Like, hey, I wasn't as available. I made work a priority. Didn't really spend the time when they tried to talk to me. I was dismissive. Like, have you done the self-evaluating? So if you've done the self-work, the healing is going to be a natural byproduct of that in any relationship, friendship, professional relationship, or romantic relationship should point you in that direction. And knowing what the healing looks like. Like some people say, well, I didn't date for 4 years to give myself time to heal. It don't take no 4 years. It don't take no 4 years. It's not time specific. It's task specific. When you can go through the emotions and the feelings without carrying them into the next relationship, that's how you know that you heal. Where those that have gone through the dissolution of a marriage and say, okay, well, whether you were single for 10 years or somebody was single for 10 months, what kind of work did you do in your 10 years versus their 10 months? Because the person in 10 months, because you don't know what it took for them to get out of that relationship. So some people start healing before the actual dissolving of the relationship or in a marriage. Sometimes the dissolution of the marriage is more so a formality when you get to that point. But the work that a person does, when they realize this is coming to an end, the 10-month person can actually do more work than the 10 person. How much interaction did you have? Like some people still have interaction with their exes. Now, for me, and just for me, what I tell my population, I highly discourage that, because if we're wrapping it up, it's a wrap. We're done. There's no need to go backwards for anything. I don't think that you can really be friends with an ex. It's hard to be friends with somebody that just being transparent, good brother. And I know we have an adult population. It's hard to be friends with somebody that you saw naked. I'm just being honest. That's what I tell my people in therapy. If you saw them naked, it's kind of hard to just go being friends. So you cannot wish ill on them. You can forgive them, but they don't have to be reinstated in a part of your life. Just move on, because you got to be mindful of who's going to come after that person, and they're going to pick up on that frequency and say, "Wait a second, that frequency is a little off," because how you interact with me is different. When this person comes around, they're just a friend. So just absolve that all together. Let's just move forward. Let's just move forward so we can have the bounty without the distractions.
Very, very interesting. Woo, that is some really good stuff, bro. That is some really good stuff. That is a lot of information to unpack, and I hope that all the viewers are able to take that and apply it to their lives, however it may apply or may be needed. because you touched on a lot of key topics, and I think those things needed to be said and heard, because we all have our own thoughts and on how we think things are supposed to be, whether it's healing in relationships, communicating, it just the being in the proper way to deal with former. Now I won't even think prior dealing with those people that you were in relationships prior to. These are all things that I think people wonder exactly what's the proper dynamic. But I think that information that you just provided was excellent. Selena says great stuff. So we definitely appreciate you. I don't know what your schedule looks like going forward in the future, but I definitely need to have you back because you were on fire tonight. You brought the A game. Listen, I know it's all star game. Hey, so I really appreciate you, and I know the viewers appreciate you as well. And for anybody that logged on late, I would encourage you to go to my YouTube channel and watch the show from the beginning, because Dr. Winfrey really gave out a lot of good information at the very beginning of the show. So if you missed the first half of the show, I would encourage you to go back or go to a Convo with B Mac on YouTube and catch the beginning of the show, because he really he brought the 5-course meal today, guys. I promise you, if you missed any of it, you will not regret going back and watching it. Selena says phenomenal, Doc. Phenomenal today, Doc. Thank you both. Thank you, Selena. Thank you for always supporting. As always, if there are topics that you want us to discuss, feel free to shoot me a message. Doc, there's one topic that I thought about earlier, and I want to get with you on, see when we can get you back for, is dealing with for family members that have people that may suffer from bipolar, schizophrenia, because I feel like that's something that I don't think is touched on enough. We talk a lot about the mental health aspect of it, but the family members that have to cope with it and what they can do just to either help that person or just for their sanity, because it's a lot on them. So I'd like to get with you to talk about that topic, try to see putting on a show for that topic as well.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me, good brother, I'm here. Anytime. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I appreciate you. And without further ado, we're going to wrap up this show. Again, thank you guys. Doc, I think I had you do the prayer last time, so I'll do it this time. Even though, matter of fact, no, because the Lord has placed that calling on your life. So I'm gonna let those who the Lord has tapped on the shoulder for that, I'm gonna let you handle that. So if you would do the prayer tonight.
Okay. All right. Let's bow our heads. Father God, we come to you, Father, first and foremost, thanking you for being who you are. We stand in awesome reverence, Father, of your grace, Father, and for all the blessings that you've given us. Father, thank you for this platform, Father. Thank you for the prompting, Father. Thank you for, Lord, whatever cultivated this in B-Mac's heart, Father. We know that you placed it there, Father, for your glory and for the healing of your people. We pray, Father, that whoever's ears and eyes that this falls upon, Father, that it will convict them, Father, to turn to you, and Father God, to turn to the individuals that you've blessed, Lord, to be able to help, Father, for it is not your desire for your children to suffer and to be hurt, Father, and to be in harm's way, Father. We pray, Lord, that you would continue to bless the families, all that are represented here, Father. Let there be no lack in anyone's home, Father. Continue to keep us safe from all sickness, disease, bacteria, infection, virus, variant, pestilence, and plague. We pray, Father, that according to the power that works within us, that we see you do exceedingly abundantly and above all that we may ask. And it's these blessings we ask in the mighty name of Jesus. And so it is. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, good brother. Again, as always, I appreciate you. Everybody that tuned in tonight, thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed this show as much as I did.
Mm-hmm.
I thoroughly enjoyed this because I feel like a lot of what this commentary was meant for me as well as for the audience. Because I'm always really trying to look at ways I can examine myself, to how I can be a better person. So until next Sunday, God bless y'all and good night.